West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
So, Mark, Republican lawmaker Thomas Massie issued a public threat amid these disqualification lawsuits that in the event that Donald Trump is disqualified from any ballot, it's the House of Representatives, which of course is controlled by Republicans, that's the final arbiter of what slates of electors to accept. Is this not basically just another promise of a January 6th where the House takes it upon itself to be the sole arbiter of the election results?
Yeah, I think you used the right word, so I want to emphasize it. This is a threat. This is a threat to democracy. It is a not so veiled threat, as you say, to try to overturn the will of the electorate. And you know, people used to discount people like Tom Massie as just some like fringe, crazy politician from Kentucky that you don't need to pay attention to. And if there's one thing we've learned from January 6th, 2021, is that you have to take those folks seriously, because they have inspired an army of people, along with Donald Trump, who's principally responsible for that insurrection. They have inspired an entire cadre of people who will engage in all kinds of activity, including violent activity, to overturn the will of the electorate. So yes, it would be unlawful. It would be unconstitutional. It would be outrageous. You know, but we saw this. Remember, you know, we saw a Louis Gohmert, who's like another one of these, you know, characters, tried to sue Mike Pence and the United States in the run-up to January 6, 2021, to say that the Electoral Count Act, that the legal structure that guides how these deliberations take place, that it was unconstitutional. So this is not a dog whistle, this is a loud foghorn aimed at our democracy. And we cannot discount it as just the rantings of a right-wing lunatic. The lunatics run the asylum in the Republican House, and we need to take this very, very seriously.
Now, you mentioned the Electoral Count Act. How does this threat by Massie square with this updated, because it was updated, the updated Electoral Count Act? Can the House determine what slate of electors it chooses?
So it's really interesting that we felt the need after 2020, after 100 years of operating in good faith under the previous Electoral Count Act, it had to be updated to deal with the threats that were posed. And yet here we are again with, more attempts to overturn it. But to answer your question directly, the Electoral Count Act, which implements the constitutional provision about how votes become electors in the Electoral College, how the electors from the votes out of the Electoral College come to the House and the Senate, how those are certified. It lays that process out in statutes, and it severely constrains what the role of Congress is. Number one, it makes clear now that the vice president's role is purely ministerial. There's no ability of the vice president to do anything more than to count the votes. But number two, it makes crystal clear that not only do you need more members of the House and Senate to object to electors, but it says that there are only two grounds upon which you can the members of the House can object. The first is that somehow the certification by the governor, the governor's certification of the results is being questioned. You know, if Governor Kemp from Georgia said that document, I didn't sign it, well, they could object because there would be a question as to whether or not he actually engaged in the certification. The only other ground that the House can object to now is that the electors, the people at the Electoral College, somehow were corrupted or acted improperly. But that's not a grounds about how the election was conducted. That's a question of how the electors after the election in what conduct they engaged in. And there's never been an allegation about any electoral misconduct in any of these cases. The electors that Joe Biden, won, they voted for Joe Biden. The electors that Donald Trump won, they voted for Donald Trump. So this is all, in some sense, you could chalk up and say it's bluster or it's uneducated, but I think it's more sinister than that, which is why I go back to your word threat. I think it is a threat to basically say, we're not going to follow this law. We don't think this law matters. We're going to engage in lawless behavior.
And of course, for anybody watching, if you want to learn more about the Electoral Count Act as it was updated or anything with regard to voting rights or elections, sign up for Democracy Docket. It's the free news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything voting and elections. Link is right here on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. So Mark, if for example, if we do see the Supreme Court rule that Donald Trump is disqualified from the ballot, and then the Thomas Masseys of the House stand up and object, and we have a fifth of the House and a fifth of the Senate, which are the new raised thresholds, would those objections, because they're not based on anything that the new rules lay out, would they just be null and void? Would they not count? Would they be able to be struck down?
They wouldn't be in order. They wouldn't be in order under the rules of the House, the rules of the Senate, the joint session, and they wouldn't be legal. Okay. The only challenges, the theory of allowing there to be challenges of the House, just to take a step back, is not to challenge whether the election was correct. It's not to challenge whether the electoral, the way in which people voted was correct. That's why you have a state process of certification, right? Before this gets to the House, remember, the state has to certify the election results. What comes out of that state certification under the Electoral Count Act is what's referred to as a certificate of ascertainment. It is signed by the governor, and it is the governor saying, I've overseen this process, and the candidate whose electors were properly chosen was Joe Biden, or whoever. And this is the actual names of the electors, right? This is why we had a fake elector scandal, because the governors in those states submitted the names of the actual electors, and then a bunch of other people said they were the actual electors. Well, under the Electoral Count Act, once you have that document signed by the governor and saying these are the electors, then the state process is over. Those electors then meet as part of the Electoral College, and those results get transmitted to to Congress. So the point of the objection right in Congress is to say, did something happen after the governor certified? After the governor was done, did something happen in that final stage where an elector was bribed, or an elector, murdered another elector and stole their vote? The elector's signature was forged. But none of that would have anything to do with who the candidates were. By the time you get to that's all well and that's all settled. So no, these would not be in order. But I think it's really important, Brian, which is why I'm so happy that you used the word that you did, that this is a threat. This is a threat that is being laid down today by Tom Massey and people who Donald Trump is inspiring, or maybe more than inspiring, to lay down a threat now and say, if the Supreme Court applies the Constitution, if the Supreme Court says that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which by its plain terms says that some kinds of candidates are just out of bounds, they're not eligible to run for federal office, they have forfeited that right by virtue of their involvement in insurrection in the past. If the Supreme Court does that, he is threatening us by saying that he and others in Congress won't abide by this. That threat, which we probably didn't take serious enough in 2020, led to a violent insurrection in 2021.
Well, what does it say that these Republicans would clearly respect the Supreme Court's decision if they ruled in Trump's favor with this disqualification case, but are already planning another January 6th style objection if they don't get their way?
Yeah, so I want you to play a game of imagination here, okay? The Supreme Court of the United States overturned, probably 2 centuries of precedent in saying that the right to bear arms under the Second Amendment was this absolutist thing that could not be restricted, that had nothing to do with a well-regulated militia, and that we are now dealing with the epidemic of gun violence that we are seeing as a result. And just imagine if people who oppose that ruling simply said, we're not going to accept that. We're going to confiscate guns. We're going to send our police in to grab guns from people. What the reaction would be. Imagine for a moment if, when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, which had been settled law and settled constitutional precedent for more than a generation, if people on the left had said, you know what, we're going to threaten states with violent reactions to this, rather than doing what people have done, which is to organize, to have ballot initiatives, to abide by the rule of law, to try to move state legislatures to vote anti-choice candidates out of office. Just, why is it that we are so quick to just assume that the right wing gets to threaten violence and gets to threaten unlawfulness, and that somehow the courts need to back away from it, that civil society needs to account for it, that somehow even the New York Times thinks we need to be understanding of it? What do they think about it in diners? Like, it's really an affront to democracy. It's an affront to how we work in a diverse, pluralistic society where there are going to be disagreements. And frankly, it's not to be tolerated anymore.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect point. Like that it's kind of baked into the cake that they're going to throw temper tantrums, and that while it's understood that Democrats have to be adults about whatever decisions, good or bad, come our way, that it's just baked in that Republicans are going to throw insurrections or violently react to something, and that they're graded on such a curve that we have to accept that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, this is the reason why I recoil at the arguments that we so often hear. People will say, well, I remember this in 2020. They're like, Joe Biden needs to win by enough that Donald Trump can't even contest the election. Right. Well, what kind of election system is it that one candidate gets to win by a little and the other candidate has to win by a lot, right? Or people say now, well, we can't have the disqualification of Donald Trump because otherwise people like Tom Massey will threaten another January 6th. Well, what kind of system is that? Like, you can't have a political system, as you say, where one side has to be adults and not. Now, I will tell you the solution to the Tom Massey problem is that the new House will take office before January 6, 2025, right? The new House takes office on January 2nd, 2025. So everyone who is concerned about this, in addition to following Democracy Docket and following you and me on our videos and making sure that they are committed to democracy, vote for a Democrat for House. Vote for a Democrat for Senate. In addition to obviously voting for Joe Biden for president, make sure that if Hakeem Jeffries is the Speaker of the House, we don't have to worry about this.
It is Thursday, the 11th of January of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, our little Yorkie, well, she's the door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life, and you need just at least a little. Jeez. All right, well, they really want to have another violent insurrection, not just this stupid one where it's all about policy and it's only just simply an insurgency. Darn. Yeah, they just can't give it up. And they're working hard at it too. Boy, Elon, how do you pronounce that guy's name? I don't know. Musk. that brat. He's just on a tear, and so is this guy Mackey. Is that his name? With the plagiarist wife, used to be at MIT. It's turning out that apparently her lifting of passages without citation is a lot more egregious than Professor Gay's. Mackey. Ackman. Mackey. Yeah, this guy, Bill Ackman. Hedge fund guy. You know what that is? He's betting on losing. I'm going to bet on the losers. Sure. And another thing that they do is take over companies, fire a bunch of people, sell off the company for parts, and then leave. That's why they're called vultures. That's what is happening to Boeing, and I'm not happy. I would prefer it, and I went on a tear the other day about this, so I'm going to repeat myself. I am sorry. Like I said, I'm not a big fan of engineers running everything, because if you've watched enough science fiction, you might know that maybe not. As long as the engineer has had like some humanities classes in their background, maybe. But regardless, when the engineers are running Boeing, you can see their planes falling out of the sky. Well, not on a regular basis, because of poor manufacturing. It only started happening when the hedge fund financiers took over the company, fired a bunch of people, and then started outsourcing. And they outsourced to a company that had repeated violations of shoddy workmanship. But now Boeing stock is going down because they're woke. Yeah, that's what Ellen is on another tear about. He's like, just hates DEI. Well, no wonder you're being sued for being a racist effer. Yeah, apartheid blood emerald heir. Give me a break. Who thought that a guy who was raised in apartheid and accepted it, all the fruits of his privilege, was going to be, an enlightened individual? Let's give him a bunch of government contracts so he can fill the sky with Skynet Terminator satellites. God damn it. Jeez. I'm telling you, you got to watch the movie Grand Canyon. Because in that movie, Steve Martin says everything that you need to know or should know in the world you can learn in the movies. And I learned that in the movies watching the Grand Canyon movie. Why have people just disregarded Twilight Zone, Outer Limits? Just all of it. You can't. We've been through this before. And, why do we have to do it again? Oh, God. I suppose people who have been through this many times are, like, looking at me as I'm approaching, we're all elderly now, I guess, officially. Saying, the young whippersnapper should have seen what it was like in Spain with Franco. Yeah, well, and there's that, too. I agree. I like to remind people that Franco's still dead. Every now and then. Okay. Yikes. All right. Enough of that. What do we have in store for you here in the curated part of the salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, as we, begin in the Bistro Cafe of said salon. Yeah, Thomas Massie threatened to facilitate another January 6th insurrection if Trump doesn't get what he wants. Yeah, you take him off any ballot, we're going to have a civil war, and we got an army. Yes, they do. And I agree. I agree with the Democracy Docket crew there. Why does MAGA get a break on, they can threaten violence, they can affect violence, and it's just like, part of the American fabric? Give me a break. I'm going to wear out that term too. Give me a break. I apologize. On the rest of the menu, a judge has rejected several claims lodged by Delaware's Attorney General in a lawsuit against the fossil fuel industry, saying that they have downplayed the risks of climate change. Voters decided to remove a small-town Nebraska school board member from office after she tried to have dozens of books pulled from the town's school libraries. Well, people are fed up. And a Montana fire chief who lost a previous job for refusing a vaccine mandate in Washington state has been charged in the January 6th insurrection. Find them all, arrest them all, try them all, incarcerate them all. Okay. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a 3-day union strike has brought train traffic to a near standstill across Germany. And a former Gambian interior minister is going on trial in Switzerland over crimes against humanity. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link is the link to our Patreon page, and please do become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. It really does help us pay our bills. If you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, we're able to pool those funds with other like-minded folk who have sent us what they might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, and it helps us put a big dent in those bills. So thank you, thank you, thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio, you can do so on Twitter and Mastodon and Spoutable and Blue Sky and Facebook by going to @Netroots Radio or just simply Netroots Radio, you know. And we all take care of the Facebook page. Tom takes care of all those other platforms. So thank you, Tom. And everything else, too. Follow me on those social media platforms as well as Tumblr and Instagram. And yeah, I'm over on Facebook, too. But follow me at Justice Putnam or simply Justice Putnam, depending. And I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime so that folks can read the actual articles from the actual reporters. Yeah, that's how we do it here, and it should be done. So we're doing it. So thank you for doing that, and follow me, and then you can get to those actual reports much easier. You can also follow the show on Twitter, such as it is at CookbookWest. And most importantly, if you could pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., 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 that would be grand. Okay. Can't get it from Stitcher, though. Okay. All right. Had to get that in. And I did. Hard to get over. Maybe one day I will. We'll see. First offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Randall Chase out of the Associated Press. A judge has rejected several claims lodged by Delaware's Attorney General in a lawsuit alleging, they have to say that, alleging, that the fossil fuel industry has downplayed the risks of climate change. Yesterday's ruling significantly narrows the scope of the suit, seeking to hold the industry liable for the effects of air pollution in the state. Democratic Attorney General Kathleen Jennings filed the lawsuit in 2020, joining forces with a California law firm that has sued the oil industry on behalf of other state and local governments. While refusing to dismiss some claims, Superior Court Judge Mary Johnston ruled, for example, that the Federal Clean Air Act preempts the state's claims seeking damages for injuries resulting from out-of-state or global greenhouse emissions and interstate pollution. However, Johnson noted that the Clean Air Act does not preempt alleged claims and damages resulting from air pollution originating from sources within Delaware. Air pollution prevention and control at the source is the primary responsibility of state and local governments, she wrote. I should just interject here. I was appointed to a select subcommittee on air pollution in Orange County in Southern California when I was in high school. And one of the major findings that we had, and it just seems so obvious, doesn't it? You can't confine attending to air pollution at the local level. It has to go over many localities. It has to go over counties and regions and states. I'm just saying. Now, she is ruling here that the law states otherwise. I would say that if one wanted to have common sense, and we've already studied this back in the 70s. Okay? I'm just saying. The judge also said the state could pursue a general claim for environmental-based public nuisance and trespass for land that the state owns directly, but not for land the state holds in public trust. The ruling cited a Delaware Supreme Court ruling last year in a lawsuit filed by Jennings against agricultural giant Monsanto over environmental damage from now banned toxic chemicals known as PCBs. Unlike contamination of land and water in Monsanto, damages caused by air pollution limited to state-owned property may be difficult to isolate and measure, the judge wrote. Nevertheless, that is an issue to be addressed at a later stage of the case. Johnston also ruled that claims of greenwashing and misrepresentations by the defendants, the oil industry, about fossil fuels' effects on the climate must be dismissed because the state failed to specifically identify alleged misrepresentations for each individual defendant. Okay. I don't know. We saw this all in real time since the 70s. Okay. Oh, God. Johnson also ruled that claims made by Jennings' office under the Delaware Consumer Fraud Act are barred by the passage of time because the 5-year statute of limitations has expired, even though we've been telling people this every day since the 1970s. Voters decided to remove a small-town Nebraska school board member from office after she tried to have dozens of books pulled from the school. More than 1,600 Plattsmouth voters supported recalling Terry Cunningham Swanson in a mail-in election this week. The Omaha World-Herald reported that a little less than 1,000 people voted to keep her on the board she joined just a year ago. Cunningham Swanson led an effort to have about 50 books removed from school libraries because of concerns about sexual content and adult themes in them. Some students protested, and one librarian resigned after the books were pulled from library shelves while they were being reviewed. Ultimately, only one book, Triangles by Ellen Hopkins, that focuses on 3 women, including one whose marriage falls apart after she engages in premarital sex, was pulled from the shelves. 11 other books were put in a restricted section that students need parental permission to check books out from, and more than 30 other books were kept on general library shelves. Whitehurst of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Montana fire chief who lost a previous job over a coronavirus vaccine mandate has been charged with spraying a chemical irritant on police officers during the insurrection. I'm sorry, Lindsay, it's not a riot. It was an insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Prosecutors say that Frank Dahlquist sprayed an orange-colored chemical agent directly into the face of one officer and later sprayed a second officer as supporters of Trump attacked the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. He was identified in part by matching his distinctive facial hair with a photo from the riot. Now, it's an insurrection to a new TV news story about firefighters who were terminated from a fire department near Seattle in April of 2022 after the agency required a COVID-19 vaccination. Later that year, Dahlquist was named chief of West Valley Fire Rescue near Helena, Montana. Dahlquist was charged with assault, obstruction of law enforcement, and other counts. He was also accused of throwing a piece of lumber toward a line of police officers, though it fell short of the officers and did not come close to hitting them, prosecutors said. FBI agents confirmed his identity by talking to firefighters who had worked with him in Issaquah, Washington, and identified him from video and photos taken on January 6. They also provided a cell phone number, which was traced to the restricted area of the Capitol that day. Now, these are all evidence. This is all evidence that the Republicans want to now obstruct, and the cell phone data is now being restricted from the actual companies that are supposed to be giving it up when issued a subpoena. All right. Somebody's getting some help here, aren't they? Yes, they are. Let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is OPB. I'm Crystal Ligori. The Pacific Northwest has been a hub for coffee culture for nearly a century. But even still, it may surprise you to know that we've got scientists here whose entire field of study is the chemistry of coffee. Christopher Hendon is an associate professor at the University of Oregon who has the appropriate nickname of Dr. Coffee. And now he and a team of volcanologists have found a way to up your coffee game by adding just a little spray of water before you grind your beans. He joins me now to explain. Christopher, hello.
Hi, Crystal. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So I know the research your team has done centered around this idea of adding just a little bit of water to the coffee beans before they're ground. I understand some coffee pros are already doing that, but no one actually studied the why behind it until now.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, this is a really nice example of academic research being inspired by some industrial know-how. So when you grind coffee, the process creates a tremendous amount of static electricity. And this has been a known problem in the coffee industry and other industries for that matter for a very long time. The practitioners that basically baristas, if you like, have been trying to mitigate this charging. About maybe 10 years ago, the idea was originally posited that maybe 1 or 2 drops of water on the whole beans would seemingly reduce the charge. Perhaps it was never charging in the first place in the grinder, or perhaps the water was just creating a surface layer on the coffee grounds themselves. They didn't really know, but the observation generally was that you were seeing fewer charged particles, so there was less mess. So we were inspired by this because that is obviously a nice scientific example of a macroscopic observable, like less mess on my counter.
Right.
Yeah, right. But then something happening on the microscopic level, like, for example, maybe no charges were ever formed. And we wonder why that is. What could possibly be giving rise to that?
What does your research mean for coffee drinkers when we're figuring out what kind of beans to buy? Because I know that different roasts have a different amount of moisture in them already.
Generally, coffee starts out somewhere around 10% internal moisture. And then you roast the coffee, turning it brown and eventually maybe even black. And as you roast it darker and darker, you're driving out more and more water. And so generally we find that for dark roast coffees, they're going to charge a lot more and a lot more negative. Whereas light roast coffees actually do charge as well, but sometimes they even charge positively. And so this is a pretty interesting phenomenon because it's very rare to find a material that can not only charge a lot, but also change its polarity from positive to negative depending on its chemical composition. And so generally the idea here is that if you're going to add a little bit of water, you're going to see the greatest impact in charge reduction for darker roast coffees because those are the ones that have the most charge. But you'll also still see the impact for light roast coffees as well, of course, because we've all experienced that where the light roast, you grind them and they go everywhere too.
Yes, I definitely have coffee chaff like all over my countertop after I grind. I do have a little bit of a background in coffee myself, but it has been a minute since I was pulling shots at a cafe. So what are the real world applications of the study, both for a home setting, but also in a cafe?
So I'll start with the home setting. I mean, fundamentally, the biggest advance here for the average user is going to be that the addition of a single drop of water, or as little as a single drop of water, is going to make a marked difference in the amount of static dust that's generated while grinding. And so this means that when you grind your beans, you're not going to see that stuff stick to the surface of the grinder and cover your counter and so forth. So fundamentally, it's just cleaner. In the industrial setting, it's a little more complicated because if you're thinking about the brew situation that would give rise to the biggest difference in having the particles be freely flowing from one another versus being clumped, that's an espresso. But in an espresso format in a cafe, they're using grinders that have to go through a tremendous amount of coffee during a busy period in the morning, for example. Mm-hmm. So right now, there's actually not a technology on the market that is going to introduce water to those beans as you're grinding in a busy cafe. It's not something that you're going to see in most cafes, in most environments for quite some time. But the cafes themselves are the place that stand to benefit the most because if you can extract more from your coffee, that leads to a direct monetary savings for the industry.
You're a chemist and Dr. Coffee by profession, but for this study, you also teamed up with volcanologists on the UO campus. Volcanoes aren't exactly what I immediately think of when I think of coffee, so can you tell me more about how that science overlaps?
This is a great example of a fruitful collaboration. I built the coffee lab in the public space on campus, and I encourage the listeners, by the way, to come and visit us because that's part of our science outreach program. And in one of our outreach activities, the volcanologists were there and were observing this static charge being generated during grinding and considered this in the context of their work. Now, basically, when a volcano erupts, it creates a plume of ash that gets ejected into the atmosphere. And sometimes the ash is so charged and staticky that you see lightning discharges above volcanoes. And actually, the amount of charge and these discharge events are very useful for studying the inside of the volcanic plume, where, of course, you can't fly a helicopter or send a drone because you're, in the middle of a volcano. So instead, you can use the charge to learn something about the topology of the volcano. And they basically simulate eruptions in the laboratory with a small plume of dust that gets ejected into a box, and they study the charging. And so we had the technology on campus already, and certainly weren't the ones to invent it. And instead, we just repackaged it and basically placed that technology underneath the grinder. We're really just using expertise from the volcanologists that I had no idea was even something that people studied. But at the same time, they also had no idea that charging in coffee was something that mattered on the industrial scale to the coffee industry. So really, this was a really nice example of, having this open platform for us to meet each other, talk about pertinent problems, and, hopefully do some really excellent science.
I know that you've shaped your career around coffee, so I am curious, what is your favorite way to drink coffee?
Well, in the morning when I get up, I prepare 1 cup for myself and 1 for my wife, and I really enjoy that period of time because then I go off to work and I don't see her for the whole day. So that's certainly my favorite way to do it. It's just to pour over coffee in the morning. But you have to remember, I work in a coffee laboratory as well. And so every day I'm surrounded by students, excellent undergraduates and graduate students that are working with coffee, and they're always producing extracts that are worthy of tasting. And so my favorite one is the one that makes the students really excited. They have that aha moment and they realize this is why they're interested in this topic, because there's flavors and sort of novel science that they're unpacking, but they're able to taste the difference in their science. And that's a really unusual but fun opportunity that sets coffee science apart from typical chemistry.
Christopher, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Christopher Hendon is an associate professor at the University of Oregon. His team's study on reducing static charge in coffee is featured in the science journal Matter. This is OPB.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Gaines. Even if you are a safe, experienced driver, accidents can happen at any time. Young children are especially at risk for injury and death in a motor vehicle crash. Dr. Erin Sauber-Schatz is a researcher with CDC's National Center for Injury Prevention and Control. She's joining us today to discuss the importance of keeping children properly restrained in motor vehicles. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Thank you.
Erin, how many children are killed or injured each year in a motor vehicle crash in the U.S.?
In 2013, 638 children aged 12 and under died in a crash, and over 127,000 were injured.
How effective have child safety seats and other safety devices been in preventing injuries and death among children?
Car seats and booster seats are very effective at preventing injury and death in a crash. But the most effective seat is the one that parents use to buckle their kids on every drive.
Where's the safest place for children to ride in a car?
The back seat is the safest place for children to ride in a car, buckled in an age and size-appropriate car seat, booster seat, or seatbelt.
How long should a child ride in a safety seat?
Children should use a car seat until they're at least 5 years old, and a booster seat until the adult seatbelt fits properly. The adult seatbelt fits properly when the lap belt lays across the upper thighs, not the stomach, and the shoulder belt lays across the shoulder, not the neck.
Erin, where should parents go in their community to get help installing and using car seats?
Parents can get one-on-one help free of charge from a certified child passenger safety technician. You can find a tech near you at cert.safekids.org and click on Find a Tech. Another option is to check with your local police or fire department.
Erin, where can listeners get more information about restraining children properly in motor vehicles?
Listeners can go to cdc.gov and type in the search box, Child Passenger Safety.
Thanks, Erin. I've been talking today with CDC's Dr. Erin Sauber-Schatz about the importance of keeping kids safe in a motor vehicle. Remember, for children under the age of 13, properly restrain them in the back seat. If you're unsure about how to install or use car seats, check with your local police or fire department. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Robert Gaines for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. With America's polarization, a special interest-driven Congress, a former president with 91 criminal indictments, a compromised U.S. Supreme Court, and rogue state legislatures, a newly updated Gallup poll shows satisfaction with American democracy plunged to just 28%, a 40-year low. In December 2023, Gallup asked just over 1,000 U.S. adults in all 50 states, are you satisfied or dissatisfied with the way democracy is working in this country? In the 9 previous polls since the question's inception in 1984, satisfaction has plunged from 61% and 60% in 1984 and 1991 to 35% in 2021 and now 28% in 2023. Democrats, Republicans, and Independents are all less satisfied than they were in 2021. Democrats dropped from 47% in 2021 to 38% in the latest survey. Independents dropped from 36% to 27%, and Republicans dropped from 21% to 17%. In 1998, long before former President Donald Trump's baseless claims of a rigged system and widespread voter fraud, conservative Americans were big supporters of American democracy, with 67% of Republicans saying they were satisfied with it. We have a link to the Gallup survey at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day the Battle of the Running Bulls occurred at GM's Fisher Plant No. 2 in Flint, Michigan. It marked the turning point in the Great Flint sit-down strike. Company guards attempted to stop food deliveries to the strikers. When confronted, the guards cleared out and the food deliveries resumed. The guards, however, reported to the local police that strikers were holding them captive. The Flint police soon arrived, throwing tear gas into the picket lines and through plant windows. The sit-downers responded with plant fire hoses and slingshots loaded with door hinges. The police continued to launch tear gas at the picketers. Then the crowd pelted police with any debris they could find. It was at this point that the police began firing indiscriminately into the crowd, seriously wounding 16. Glenora Johnson of the Women's Auxiliary, speaking from the sound truck, called her women to action. She recollected in 1976, quote, that when I appealed to the women of Flint, I said, there are women down here, the mothers of children, and I beg you to come down here and stand with your husbands, your loved ones, your brothers, your sweethearts. Then I saw the first woman struggling, and I noticed when she started to break through and come down that a cop grabbed her coat, and she just kept coming. As soon as that happened, other women broke through, and the cops did not want to fire into the backs of women. When the women did that, the men came naturally, and that was the end of the battle. The Women's Auxiliary would continue to play a vital role throughout the strike.
Sit down, just keep your seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down, you gotta think. Sit down, sit down.
For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 34 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs only in the upper 30s, maybe the low 40s. Bit cloudy this morning with a few showers developing throughout the day, and we will have winds out of the west-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, expecting maybe something around a quarter inch, all said and told, of rain today. Overcast tonight with lows in the mid-30s, winds light and variable, and showers early tomorrow, Friday, becoming a steady rain later in the morning. Highs in the low 40s, winds light and variable. Looks like we're going to have a quarter to a third of an inch of rain. Pollen is rated as none here in our little hamlet of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 33 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at level 1. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.19 inches. Visibility is at 6 miles, and relative humidity is at 94%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. It is. London is 41 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 32 and clear with a potential disruption due to extreme low temperatures. That should be overnight temps. Rome is 50 degrees and clear. Bagram is 35 and fair. Kiev is 29 degrees and cloudy. Hong Kong is 63 and fair. Tokyo is 38 and clear. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 62 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 45 degrees and sunny with a coastal flood advisory. Chicago, Illinois is 31 degrees and cloudy with a winter storm watch. And New York, New York is 42 degrees and partly cloudy with an active gale watch. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Kirsten Grieshaba of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A union representing many of Germany's train drivers started a nearly 3-day strike early on Wednesday in a rancorous dispute with the country's state-owned main railway operator over working hours and pay. Train travel across the country and in many cities came to a near standstill, with commuters and other travelers struggling to find alternatives involving long-distance bus or car travel or flights. State-owned Deutsche Bahn said only about 20% of its long-distance trains were running, and many regional and commuter trains in cities like Berlin were also not in operation. The strike by the train drivers union, GDL, has had a massive impact on train services in Germany, said a Deutsche Bahn spokeswoman. We regret the restrictions and hope that many people who were unable to reschedule their journey will get to their destination. The GDL union strike on cargo trains began on Tuesday evening. In the wage dispute, the union had already called 2 previous warning strikes last year, which lasted a maximum of 24 hours in passenger transport. The current strike lasts until Friday at 6 p.m. Deutsche Bahn had tried to legally prevent the strike until the very end, but on Tuesday night, a court ordered that the strike could go ahead. Late last month, members of GDL voted overwhelmingly to stage open-ended strikes in a bitter dispute. In addition to pay raises, the central issue is the union's call for shift workers' hours to be reduced from 38 to 35 hours per week without a pay reduction, a demand for which employers so far have balked. GDL argues that it would make working for the railway more attractive and help attract new recruits, while Deutsche Bahn says the demand can't practically be met. Germany's Transportation Minister Volker Wissing called on both sides to return to the negotiating table. A way has to be found that both sides can get along with, the minister told daily newspaper Bild. That means talking to each other. I urge both sides to return to the negotiating table. However, union head Klaus Weselski said it is now up to Deutsche Bahn to present an improved offer.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staff at the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A former Interior Minister of Gambia was going on trial in Switzerland on charges including crimes against humanity for his role in years of repression by the West African country's security forces against opponents of its longtime dictator. Advocacy groups hailed the trial of Osman Sonko, Gambia's interior minister from 2006 to 2016, under then-President Yahya Jammeh, as an opportunity to reach a conviction under universal jurisdiction, which allows the prosecution of serious crimes committed abroad. Sonko was taken in on Monday in a police van to Switzerland's Federal Criminal Court in southern Bellinzona. He applied for asylum in Switzerland in November of 2016 and was arrested 2 months later. The Swiss Attorney General's office said the indictment against Sanko, filed in April, covers crimes during 16 years under Gemma, whose rule was marked by arbitrary detention, sexual abuse, and extrajudicial killings. Swiss prosecutors say Sanko is accused of having supported, participated in, and failed to stop attacks against regime opponents in the country, which juts through neighboring Senegal. The crimes include killings, acts of torture, acts of rape, and numerous unlawful detentions, Swiss authorities say. The trial is set to run through January 30th. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.